webinar has.
Oh, there we go.
We've
We're
been
recording.
recorded.
Hello, everybody. Now, hopefully you can see us. Oh, look, we've got participants coming on. Excellent. Can someone just send us something in the Q&A or chat just to say that they can hear us and we're not here just, you know, looking gorgeous. Looking to ourselves.
15 minutes into the webinar, we go, oh, we didn't hear a word you said.
Has
happened before.
Thank you very much, Catherine. It is great to hear. Great that you can hear us. Jessie too. Hello. Nice to see you. Thank you for coming along. So we had a huge, I can't believe how many people were interested in industrial relations to start off 2023.
Well, it's nothing like starting the year with a bang, is it?
Absolutely. It was, it's been a very positive start. Oh, now I'm jumping ahead.
Easy, Phoebe. I know it's exciting, but easy.
Gearing up to get into it.
Give the people time to just, you know, join us and settle in on a day where the sun is shining. I stepped outside before and I almost didn't come back.
Oh, it's a bit too hot out there though.
No, it was divine.
So we're on the last day of January, so we can, this is the final day that we can say Happy New Year. We've officially into the grind
time of
2023. But I do hope that everybody did manage to get a bit of a break over the Christmas and New Year. And I hope that you've had a bit of a chance to think through some of your plans, objectives, goals, what you want to achieve in your workplace, in your life,
business,
in your business,
all of the above.
Yeah, exactly. And look, it's really easy to think these things through. I think taking that step of just putting just a little bit pen to paper as well. It's actually quite rewarding because sometimes we get so much into the
whirlwind,
and just doing and always focusing on all the problems moving forward that we sometimes forget to look back and think, oh wow, look at all the things that we actually have achieved. And so if you set out at the beginning of the year and write down some of the things you want to do, hopefully as the year progresses you can look back and you can go, wow, I actually did get to spend some time on this, or I did this, or we finished that or completed it. If not, you need to come and talk to us if you're not getting anywhere with it.
So I need to come and talk to you because most of the time I feel like that. I have all of these things to do, and then you look back and you go, did I get to any of them?
Yeah,
probably could have done a little bit more of a concerted effort.
Of course you did. Okay, so what are we sitting? We're sitting at like 2 minutes past.
2 minutes past.
Yeah, I reckon people's time is precious.
Absolutely.
Let's rock and roll this. HR 2023, take it away.
I think it's already a bit of a mic drop moment with the start of 2023, and I think our motto is going to be there's going to be lots of new learnings for employers in 2023. A whole raft of legislation changes that have come off the bat quite quickly, even though it was sort of spoken about through Parliament for such a long time. The implementation has come through quite swiftly, and some of them are on our doorstep or pending on our doorstep. So there's going to be some significant milestones and dates that are going to become critically important, I think, for employers, more so this year than ever before. Yeah,
and we're now settling into another year of Labor in government, and I think that that does have an impact on the IR landscape and where we're sitting. And there's a lot of pressures out there at the moment as well, rising cost of living, high employment rates, low unemployment rates, the need to, or the change with getting immigration coming back in. Like it's a bit of an interesting space that we're working in, and the world is a little bit different post-COVID than what it was before in regards to flexibility and all those types of things, expectations from employees to come into the workplace, flexible agreements. So it's an interesting time, I think. Anyway, we're fluffing along now, so we'll start. You're not here. You miss out. Oh gosh, how do I go for the next slide?
You did it just before. What did you do?
Oh yeah, here we are. That one. Got it. Okay.
Okay. I think when we put these slides together, I had to do a bit of a double take and go, is it 13 years since the introduction of Fair Work? And it sort of, then I started to get the shivers because it reminded me, I did get old very quickly, no grey hair, but also the fact that we went through that work choices period, and then we went into Fair Work, and then we went into modern awards. And at the time, it was such an upheaval, you couldn't see the forest for the trees. And you look back on it and go, that was 13 years ago.
It's our new norm.
you know, that's an incredible reflection.
Mhm.
A number of key implementation dates scattered throughout this year. So unfortunately, it's not just one significant date that you're going to need to be mindful of. And again, further industrial relations reform anticipated next year. So we're going to be in this constant flux of new things coming in. And these also stem from this Secure Jobs, Better Pay bill from 2022.
The other thing too is just a bit of a reminder that each of the modern awards gets updated on a
4-year cycle.
I was going to say 3, so 4-year cycle. So basically they're continually reviewing different awards and taking feedback that's come from industry groups and unions, and making sure that it's harmonized, you know, with other awards, conditions, commission cases, etc. So it's super important to be aware if your modern award has been updated. It's gone through. Last year we saw the restaurant, the hospitality, the Shads. Shads was the year before. It was Shads last year.
No, Shads was last year. Well, the Shads seems to be on an ever-evolving change cycle, but their main review, I think it was July. So we saw all those changes.
When we saw the changes come through. So just make sure that you jump into Fair Work and just see when your award did get reviewed, or if it's on the upcoming agenda, or if you're not sure, just give us a call and we can let you know too. Okay.
All right. So we've got some key start dates, and this is a publication that has been put out by the Fair Work Ombudsman. So you've probably already seen it at some point, but if you haven't.
So Secure Jobs, Better Pay, is that the name of the bill?
That was the name of the bill.
Yeah.
Yeah. So all of these changes are a direct result of that bill, which sort of passed through Parliament December, like early December, late November last year. So as you can see, some of the changes have already come into place in 2022. And we're going to go through some of what those changes are. Some of them were released with future dates. So, for example, when we're talking about the sunsetting of zombie agreements, the legislation was passed, but there's an implementation date basically 12 months after. So there's grace periods for some of these changes and reforms. Probably the most significant one happening tomorrow is the introduction of your paid family and domestic violence leave, particularly for employers that have got more than 15 staff. And then a couple of other changes happening later in the year. So this is sort of a really good little, I guess, cheat sheet to highlight for your business where some of these changes are going to have an impact, because some of them may not impact you at all, and you know you can skip past those ones. But having these dates sort of as an easy reminder or visual
cheat sheet.
Cheat sheet.
Do you know what I find interesting for this is that the objectives changing to job security and gender equality. I would say that's got a big equal sign into getting rid of casuals. Not getting rid of, but
yeah, I think we've had that age-old debate about have casuals actually served their time, because you know the industrial definition of casual versus what the industry needs a casual to be are two very, very different things. And so that's been on the drawing board. But having said that, I think I've said for like the last 13 years that the sunsetting of zombie agreements is going to happen. It's going to happen. It's going to happen. Yeah. And it got so close so many times, but now it's here.
Because we've known that there's bipartisan support. So for those of you that aren't aware of what we mean when we're talking about zombie agreements. Oh, there you go.
Don't jump ahead, don't want to speak.
Look at that. Beautiful segue in there. Is there anything else that you want to talk about?
No, because we're pretty much going to go through these key ones.
Okay. Zombie agreements. So this is for enterprise bargaining agreements or collective agreements.
ECAs, EBAs, there's so many acronyms around for them. But I think this, and some employers will shoot me for saying this, but I think this has probably been a long time overdue. The zombie agreements, or the sunsetting of a zombie agreement, is loosely defined as any agreement that was negotiated and approved by the Commission, whether that was the old QIRC, which is the Queensland Industrial Relations Commission, the AIRC, that Work Choices Commission, whatever they call themselves. They had 3 or 4 different names throughout that time, or Fair Work in 2009 or 2010 if it was approved under the transitional legislation. So it's not a hard and fast rule. You can't just pick up your EBA and say, yep, it was done in 2010. I'm safe, I'm good. The zombie agreement clause is not going to affect me. You need to make sure that if your agreement was done pre-2010, you're absolutely in this bucket. or if it was approved in 2010 or after under the transitional bill, and it will actually have that on your approval notice from the Fair Work Commission. It'll say that it was approved under the Fair Work Act transitional blah, 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 blah. If your agreement is one of those, you've essentially got till the 6th of December this year. So you've still got a few months, but you need to decide what you're going to be doing with that agreement, because come the 6th of December, the Fair Work Commission will automatically terminate your agreement, which means no longer enforceable, no longer usable, and you have to have a strategy of what you're going to do, because you cannot keep those same terms and conditions.
So I think that they've started out staggered. If my crystal ball will say that once they've got through this period, they'll start doing other years. So they'll start, you won't be able to have agreements past a certain date after its expiry. So basically they have 4 years until you can renegotiate your enterprise bargaining agreement. However, if no one wants to renegotiate it, till now it's just stayed alive forever, as long as the minimum wages align with the award, which is really challenging when you're dealing with some of those agreements that were made pre-Fair Work. This is just the start of it. And I think that the knock-on effect of this, so if you've got a zombie agreement, you should know about this if you've got a pre-2010, and if you don't, or you're not sure what to do, then you need to give us a call and we can have a chat to you about it. I think from the bigger picture of it is that if you have got an enterprise bargaining agreement, even if it's after that, but it's expired, you need to start to, have a bit of a game plan as to what you're going to do moving forward, and what the impact is going to be for your business. So, for example, if your EBA went, what impact that's going to make to your payroll cost, if it would be a good thing, if it would be a bad thing, how you can plan, and what challenges it would present. The other thing that I think it will do is that there's been a lot of challenges in getting enterprise bargaining agreements approved through the Commission. They used to look at them more holistically as better off overall. Now they're like pulling them apart and looking at every single employee in every single situation. And that's really hindered the time that it's taken to get the EBAs agreed, and it's made them very unattractive, because it's, unless you're paying well and truly above the award, there doesn't seem to be
every element,
So I do believe that the union like having EBAs because it means that it's an above award agreement, but the union also do agree that that EBAs are too prohibitive and too difficult to get through at the moment. So I think as we see these zombie agreements coming up, more agreements having to be renegotiated or looked at, we're going to see some space. So at the moment, we're really said to our clients, don't even go there. It's not worth it unless you pay a lot over the award. It's so hard to get these through. But we're coming into a different space, and it's going to be a watch and see. But I think that potentially EBAs could have their day again if they can make them a little bit more flexible. The other thing that I think we'll see is more union movement, because this is a really good way for unions to get involved in workplaces and do a negotiation. And then, that's how they start to get their members, because they say they're going to negotiate better terms, and they'll also be getting better press and media exposure. So I do think that we will start to see some more union movement and conversation starting to happen, obviously depending upon what's the hot story of the day, but it wouldn't surprise me. Watch this space.
Yeah, absolutely. But, I think I look back at some of the agreements that are in this zombie category, because, I've I guess been in this game a long time, and I see these agreements that even I did, 2007, 8, 9, and they're still being used in the workplace. And basically what Fair Work is saying is that they're no longer fit for purpose. They don't meet the requirements of the legislation, so therefore we're enacting the automatic termination of those agreements. So please don't wait till the 5th of December to decide what you're going to do. We need to have a bit of a proactive plan now for any employers that might be in that category.
Yeah. Okay. Next point.
I think the prohibition on pay secrecy clauses came out.
That's interesting.
It is. Basically, it is unlawful now for an employer to include any restrictions or secrecy in relation to pay in an employment contract. So it's really important that if you have template employment contracts, even if they've come from us and they essentially weren't done in this year or weren't reviewed this year, there's a very good chance that those contracts will have in the confidentiality section, usually, that an employee is required to keep their remuneration details private and confidential. Those terms are now actually unlawful, but essentially don't, I guess, freak out just yet if you've issued a contract in the last couple of weeks with a pay secrecy clause in it. I do think there's probably going to be some grace, but you really do need to go back and have a look at all of your templates and make sure that those clauses are removed going forward.
And also these policies, and people put them in handbooks and all sorts of things.
And it's checking all of those formats. So every touch point that you have that deals with remuneration, like I said, employee handbooks, policies, etc., induction slides, all of those things do need to be removed. And it's important to realise that with this, the Fair Work Commission has extended their scope to deal with equal remuneration orders. So therefore, if
make it more transparent.
Yes. Yeah.
In a sense, you can't hide behind, we're not able to provide that information.
That's right. And this is also going to have a flow-on effect to enterprise bargaining as well, because there used to be commercial in confidence information where you didn't have to release essentially commercially sensitive information, and it had been hid behind before. So the flow-on effect is making, I think, every touch point more transparent, which we could argue all day whether it's right or wrong, but essentially this is now what the legislation is saying is the law. Also then the respect at work. Now this respect at work and the sexual harassment focus has been in the limelight for a little while now. What is now, I guess, really on our doorstep is the emphasis that has been placed on a positive duty of care for employers in eliminating, not preventing, eliminating sexual harassment from the workplace. So if you weren't aware, back, I think it may have been last year or even the year before, sexual harassment was added to the definition of misconduct under the Fair Work Act. So when we talk about misconduct, we're talking about theft, assault, fraud, loosely, sexual harassment, which was behaviour that would warrant instant dismissal without notice. Still needed a process, but the notice component was removed because of the severity of the behaviour, so to speak. So with this positive duty of care, the emphasis is being placed on the principle, or the PCBU, which is linked back to workplace health and safety, to say that the PCBUs have got an obligation to do everything that is reasonable in eliminating sexual harassment from the workplace. So it's not enough, for example, just to have your magic little employee handbook that your employees sign on induction and put away and never referred to, and you never doing education sessions on sexual harassment, bullying and discrimination, etc. So you really do need now to have a proactive plan of how you're regularly going to be engaging with your workforce to ensure that you are positively reinforcing zero tolerance for sexual harassment.
So think of it that if someone puts in a sexual harassment complaint and they go to Fair Work or Workplace Health and Safety, they could go to as well, and they say they come out and do an investigation of it, they're going to want to know what your policy is and what actions and what training and what prevention measures you have put in place to ensure that it is a employment place that is free of sexual harassment. So you have to think, how would I be able to answer those questions? And look, it's not a huge amount. Like, I would hope that a lot of you have our staff handbook, which clearly covers off on sexual harassment. So that's, part of your, it would be in your policies and your handbook. And then it's really about scheduling, maybe covering it in an induction process when people first start. And then the next part would be, I would expect to see it on at least an annual basis, a 5-minute toolbox talk, lunch and learn sort of session about, one of the policies that we're updating. So it's that proactive. So it's not a huge amount. You're not having to send days courses and do a lot, but you need to be seen to be doing something and documenting what you are doing. And I guess most importantly, what you need to do is ensure that if there is a complaint or something comes up, that you actually do something about the complaints. I was just looking at that question. Do you want to do these questions as we go along? Do we need to do something for existing staff to let them know their secrecy clauses are now void?
We haven't seen anything in the legislation to say that contracts have to be renewed, but you certainly, if you had an event that happened where you had two employees talking about their remuneration, you certainly couldn't rely on those pay secrecy clauses in a contract that was issued prior to the legislation changing. So no, I don't think you have to reissue all of your contracts.
No.
Yeah.
Okay, that's sexual harassment.
Interestingly enough, by what I've read in terms of this positive duty for sexual harassment is that the Fair Work Commission is now sort of implementing an additional jurisdiction. So we're all familiar with the unfair dismissal jurisdiction, the general protections. We've heard about this stop bullying jurisdiction. We're now going to have like a very similar sexual harassment, which will be a specific jurisdiction that is set aside by the Fair Work Commission specifically to deal with sexual harassment complaints. So it sort of does, I guess, broaden the scope. They're taking it very, very seriously, and I'd be interested to see what sort of penalties, infringements come out against principals or PCBUs over the coming sort of 12 months.
That's really interesting that principals will now be vicariously liable for acts of their employees or agents. So it's basically saying that you're potentially liable for your employees if they've acted in an
and if you
way.
haven't got all those reasonable management steps in place, I mean, we all know that we can talk to a blue in the face and it's not going to prevent an individual from doing something, but if you can demonstrate that you have taken every reasonable step to educate that person shouldn't do those particular behaviors and they choose to do it anyway, then you've sort of removed your vicarious liability.
And you know, there's a big difference between, you know, going in the kitchen and putting your hand up someone's skirt is kind of in your face. That is not appropriate. But also start to think about, you know, calendars that you've got that are around, you know, jokes that you might have in your newsletters or that get passed around by email for staff, you know, inappropriate banter, which may happen, because even though you might think it's funny and, you know, that you think the recipient does, if someone finds it offensive and inappropriate, then that could land you into a whole lot of hot water. So, yeah, just you need to have a really good think about that workplace culture and what is respectful behaviour in the workplace.
Yeah.
And I think respectful behaviour to a 5-year-old.
I think it's certainly going to be interesting to see what cases come up over the next sort of 12 to 18 months, which ones are tried.
There will be some.
Absolutely. Which ones are tried and tested. Okay, multi-employer bargaining. This is a bit of a...
Lots of media about this.
Lots of media about it, but it's almost like big swing, no ding. But potentially it could impact... What's that big swing? No, it was like lots of fanfare, but when we hit it, it was like there was no connotation.
I was thinking a different ding.
The perception of what you were intending, of what you heard, was very much off the mark. Please don't love to complain. There is now a provision to enable agreements covering multiple employers. So this can include your competitors, external companies, supply chains, or selected groups. Now, I think that this is probably a big win for the union movement. It's just my observation, because they have been extended significant power in negotiations and triggering negotiations.
So it's better for unions than it is for employers.
I would say
because it can force employers into the EBA process.
That's right. So I'm going to use a fast food example, just because, you know, because I can. So you might have some fast food chains essentially that already have enterprise agreements in place that have been negotiated by unions, and they might go into a renegotiation. So let's just say it's McDonald's. I'm not saying McDonald's does or doesn't have an EBA. I'm just using it as an example. So then there's nothing then preventing them going and knocking on Hungry Jack's, Red Rooster, Subway, and because they're all in the same industry. They're all covered by the same award and they all have, you know, similarities. So what it can do is then just extend out the reach of these
bringing up these wages.
And I mean, it may be very good for the end user being the employees in these groups, because then they're basically having that pay equality across multiple employers. But it does mean, you know, you might have, for example, a smaller independent owned franchise that's in fast food having to then compete with and match and be in negotiations with some of these really big players.
Because I think what's really important for you to understand is that it's not only the employer's right to go into an EBA or to go into negotiation. The employee can also come to the table and say, we want an EBA, and you have to negotiate in good faith. You can't say, no, bugger off, we don't want that, we're happy with the award. If an employee comes to you and says, we want an EBA, you have to go through that process. It doesn't happen very often, but through this it could with the unions.
And at the same time, in the reverse, I mean, this is probably going back a step, an employee can actually lodge an application to have an agreement terminated.
Yeah, which we have had.
It was the first one for us that we'd experienced, where an employee actually went to the commission and said, I don't believe that this agreement is now in the public interest, fit for purpose. One employee, and that employer was forced to terminate their agreement. Even though every other employee in the workplace wanted to keep it, they were forced to terminate it and make some.
Well, no, what the commission actually said is that I agree with the employee, this may not be in the best interest. You can either renegotiate a new EBA
because it had expired.
Or because it had gone past the nominal expiry date, or you can revert back to the award. And it was, they wouldn't have got another EBA through with such good terms.
And the employees that were there didn't want to lose those terms.
No, they didn't, because they had the ability to pick up extra hours under the EBA, which was a term that you used to get that you couldn't get anymore.
And it meant that going back to the award made some of the elements of the business non-financially viable. So we're just going to cut them and go, well, we can't do that anymore. So those hours that were available to do that are no longer here. Sorry.
Popular stuff, remember, huh?
Yeah.
Fixed term contracts, flexible week requests. We've been sort of I feel like we've been a lone ranger talking about frustrations with fixed term contracts, and now Fair Work's come to the party.
Well, come to the party. I don't know if they've come to the party. They've done a Miley Cyrus, I reckon. They came in on a wrecking ball. Which this, I guess, I find this really interesting, because fixed term contracts in particular industries have been the norm since David was a boy.
Particularly if it's a government funded type, because government does them.
That's the key point. So you've got the government now saying that it's unlawful to do more than 2 consecutive fixed term contracts in an environment that is dictated that their funding is on 3, 4, 5-year fixed term recurring or non-recurring contracts. So if the way the government pays them is now essentially outside of the way in which they can actually engage
and how they actually operate, because government organisations aren't covered by Fair Work, and they have fixed term contracts all the time.
But all of those subsidiaries that are particularly in social and community services, where they're funded organisations, so they're covered by Fair Work, but the money comes from a state or a federal government source. So they get drip fed their money on a fixed term contract by the government, but they can't now align their employment with those government periods. So it does mean that employers that are using fixed term contracts, particularly tied to government funding, are going to be at risk that the provisions of the National Employment Standard in terms of redundancy, etc., is going to apply to some of their employees if their government funding is revoked.
So you still can do a fixed term contract, just to be clear, but you can't do more than twice in a row. So you can have a fixed term contract for 6 months, and then you could have another fixed term contract for another 6 months, but after that you have to offer full permanent employment. Or the fixed term contract can't go beyond 2 years. So
for the same role.
For the same role. So you can change roles with that.
Oh,
it's a grey area.
As long as you're not trying to rob Peter and pay Paul and
I'm
just call it something else.
Fancy talking.
Yeah.
With it. Look, and I think you hit it the nail on the head. We're just flying with our cliches today. Is that what they're saying is that if after 2 years, or after 2 fixed term contracts, is fairly stable, reasonable, ongoing employment, therefore if you suddenly take that job away from them, they should be compensated with some sort of redundancy pay.
Yeah.
That's the impact, isn't it?
That's pretty much what it's saying. And also what it means is if you've got a contract or a fixed term contract where you've breached the new rules, the contract is still enforceable, save and except the fixed term element. So the terms and conditions are there, except the fixed term element is removed. It's not enforceable, which means that the employee is going to be able to have access to the National Employment Standard, redundancy, and also unfair dismissal. Because it's no longer a fixed term contract, despite what it may actually say on the piece of paper.
So so basically, if you are on one of those government contract type things and it goes beyond the 2 years or more, 2 consecutive times, then you will need to pay a redundancy and factor that in with your costings.
Yeah, that's right. Or you're basically going to be offering full-time or part-time permanent positions, for want of a better word, rather than fixed term. Just obviously keep in mind that it doesn't apply to apprentices and trainees.
Right.
Because when you engage an apprentice, for example, it's still a fixed contract for the duration of your apprenticeship, which is 3 to 4 years, depending on the individual. That doesn't mean that because that period's extended beyond 2 years that you're obliged to keep the apprentice at the end of that registered apprentice.
So, but just for clarity though, that if you're employing an apprentice and you want that role is always earmarked as being an apprentice role, you would need to put that into their initial employment contract, that their employment is only while they're an apprentice, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Rather than an ongoing position beyond their apprenticeship. That needs to be really clearly written into the contract.
And it also needs to be clearly written that you can actually terminate the apprentice should there be issues of poor performance, etc. If they've been there 12 months and they're not performing and they're not meeting the expectations, that you can actually terminate that apprenticeship prior to the 4-year period.
And just as a bit of a side there, because we like to go down some rabbit holes.
Segue
into it. If you have got if you are terminating an apprentice for whatever reason, it's really important that you advise the apprentice or provider as well, because they're 2 different contracts. You've got one that's a contract with Fair Work, so you need to make sure that you've gone through and met the requirements for terminating their employment, and then secondly, you're terminating their contract with the apprentice board, so you need to give them reason. They're usually pretty good, but I have had a situation where an employer got caught out and they terminated an apprentice because they just weren't performing. It was all very legitimate and reasonably done, but the apprentice board went a bit nana because they hadn't been advised.
Is that a technical
That's
term?
a really technical term.
Nana.
They went completely nana.
Not one that I've actually heard.
Oh, Emma's got a question. Can you please, are you ready?
Can you please advise, as a complex organisation made up of various different entities, that we need to be willing to bargain or refuse for each entity? Look, it's my understanding that if your entities can be separated, then yes, you are going to have to refuse for each entity. If they're trying to do an all-up approach, I'm assuming you're talking about the multi-bargaining requirements under the legislation. I guess it depends on who they've actually, served as the employer. If there is a holding company with all of these entities underneath it, then you may not have to. But I think that's really going to come down to how the information is served on the employer.
Yeah. And the role definition so I've gone back too far.
You skipped again.
I skipped again because this next one's important. I watched the space with this.
The flexible work arrangements. Look, we could sit here and have a pretty robust debate as to whether or not this is off the back of COVID, or I don't know. Employees are now.
Is.
You think?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Or do you think it is trying to really hone in on the fact that it's not a one-size-fits-all approach? Full-time, part-time, casual, they're blocks, they're like this, but I think people are actually saying to us, well, that doesn't really suit me, that doesn't meet my.
But I think that comes with COVID, because I think that employers that they said no, we couldn't possibly operate if people were remotely, and in COVID they were forced to, and so now they're saying, well, you need to reasonably consider it, because but you have to give a valid reason. It doesn't mean that if someone requests to be able to work from home or have flexible arrangements that you have to grant it, but you can't just say no or have a policy in place to say that we will not allow flexible arrangements. You need to be seen to be genuinely considering the request and seeing whether or not it will work for the organisation.
That's it. And I think there's some added complexities in there, because a flexible work arrangement, if you ask 10 people what a flexible work arrangement was, you would have 10 different answers because they're so highly individualized. They can be anything from a variation of hours, variation of start finish times, days of the week, starts, school drop-offs, all of those sorts of things.
Working from home,
or working from multiple locations, and having the ability to do. Also having the ability maybe to take an extended break in the middle of the day for particular reasons. Job sharing, all of that. If somebody wants to job share with me, that'd be great. I could put in a request to you to get a job share.
Why don't we just clone you and have two of you?
Because the world
working
could
for
not
us.
put up with two of me. It's a guaranteed fact. The world could not put up with two of me. But I do think that employers need to be careful where flexible work arrangements are made because of family responsibility. Because I think that they are potentially going to be harder to decline without.
When they're declined because of family responsibilities. I think you're saying that it's going to be harder to put them in place.
No.
Why that would be an issue.
No, harder for the employer to decline. Working from home, for example. If I said, look, I want to work from home because Phoebe's too loud and I don't get any work done, and that
she says that.
I do say that. And Beck said, no, because if I work from home, then Phoebe calls me and then she's too loud for me. So I'm not allowed to work from home. I have to work here in the office. That's got really nothing to do with a family connection.
No.
Or a family responsibility. Whereas if there was a request for, a delayed lunch break, for example, so a parent could go and pick up their children from school and drop them at after school care, all of those things, I think it's really going to be harder.
You have to be a little bit careful too with flexible arrangements to make sure that they meet the requirements of the award or having an IFA in place as well, because then is it going to be working more than 6 hours for that?
Absolutely.
And so, just have a little bit of caution around that. Don't just say, no, I'm the employer, this is my rights. You just may need to just take a step back and think about how you're going to be handling that situation. And
I think we're going to see more and more of them as employees know
their rights.
Start to, enforce their known rights.
New generation too, the younger generation is wanting more flexibility and will challenge the status quo.
Interestingly enough, a history lesson again. This is what was the whole premise behind work choices in 2006. It was basically saying here, let the employer and the employee decide what works for them. And I always said that legislation was 10 years ahead of its time.
Yeah, there you go.
So there you go, history lesson. All right.
Oh, this is a good one.
Domestic and family violence leave. So if you are an employer with 15 or more employees, your paid domestic violence leave starts tomorrow on the 1st of February. If you have less than 15, still in that small business definition, 1st of August 2023 is your kickoff date. That doesn't mean that if you are a small business and you have an employee who's affected by domestic violence, they can still take the unpaid leave of 5 days, but the 10 days paid leave does not start for small business until August. Couple of key points. It applies to casuals and it's paid leave for casuals. Up until now, really, the only other form of paid leave that casuals got was long service leave. Now, casual employees will be paid for this domestic violence leave. The Fair Work Ombudsman put out a pretty good resource, I reckon, which was a little quick start. And I guess we could probably send this out. It's a public resource, which gives us a pretty good definition of what is family violence. And I thought, the paragraph was actually going to be quite small, but there's a whole page here on what constitutes domestic and family violence. Because again, if you ask 10 people what they thought domestic and family violence was, you're going to get 10 different answers.
It's abuse or threatened abuse of pets.
Yes. Yes.
Technology assisted abuse.
Yes.
Beck, you do that to me. You abuse me, but I don't use it. We're sort of married, aren't we?
This is not funny.
Well, it's not funny. And actually, I have to say that at first I'm like, seriously, it's another expense for the employer. But I actually think that Australians should be quite proud of the fact that they are saying this is a really big issue and we are going to really put it under the spotlight. And if people are suffering from domestic and family violence, then they can and should speak up, and there is some financial assistance to support them, because, you know, this is something that we need to stop at. And actually, if someone is dealing with domestic and family violence, I think the actual time that they have off unpaid leave is probably a small cost compared to the impact that having to deal with that is. And if you as an employer know, and you're able to give them the right support and resources and all those types of things, it's probably going to make a better employee and workplace for you. So it's a good investment, because if you're suffering some of this abuse and challenges, and you're coming to work, you may not be in a good space, and it may not present of the fact that I'm not in a good space today. It may come out and manifest in the way that they're rude to their customers, or fight with their colleagues, or make mistakes at work and that type of thing. So I think that, yeah, look, I know that there's some people saying, yeah, it's another cost for employers. I agree. I think that it's something that the business community should be proud that we're putting our hand up and saying, yeah, we're going to be supporting them.
Yeah.
They're stomping out.
That's right. And I also think that, you know, when we're talking about this sort of behaviour, there's an element of, I guess, employer, we go back to that positive duty of care and education of what's okay and what's not okay. But I think some of the key things that actually were roped into this family and domestic violence that were not a surprise, but I had to go, oh, okay, were things like spiritual and cultural abuse, the abuse of threatening of pets. So it's not just the standard, I guess, physical or
That's
sexual.
a really
financial.
interesting one.
Yes. So it's really important that you consider that it's not just probably within a standard, I guess, text box definition of family and domestic violence. Now, the family and domestic violence is designed to be taken where an individual is experiencing domestic violence, needs to do something to deal with the impact of that violence, and it's impractical to do that outside of their ordinary working hours. But it also extends to people who are providing support to a close relative.
Oh, okay. I realize that.
So it is when a person or a close relative is experiencing.
And they've listed that down as child, parent.
Well, it's pretty much the same, the definition that is used for immediate family, except it doesn't refer to a member of the employee's household.
Right.
But it does include, so we've got the household excluded, but it does include a person related to the employee according to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander kinship rules. And that's a big one, because look, I'm probably the first to admit that I have an understanding of the kinship rules, but how it really intrinsically works, I don't. So, you know, there could be some connections that are coming to you as an employer that you weren't even aware of.
Do they need to provide any proof?
They do. You can ask for evidence, and evidence can be police documents, court documents, documents from a like a domestic violence service.
And what about just a
stat
data? Yeah, stat deck. Yeah.
So they're the listed sort of, I guess, acceptable pieces of evidence that we're aware of at the moment. The other critical thing is, I guess, this 10 days. So if you're a large employer, as of tomorrow, your employees will get 10 days straight up. All right. It's not accrued. It doesn't accrue every.
For casuals and everything. Everyone's available straight away.
10 days. Then the next lot of 10 days occurs on the employee's work anniversary.
Oh, okay. So if I had 10 days now, and then my work anniversary was the 1st of July, I'd get another 10 days the 1st of July.
That's right.
My anniversary was the 1st of December, it would revert to the 1st of December and then be 1st of December thereafter.
Right. But it doesn't roll over.
Yes, so
if you don't use it, you lose it. Okay.
Let's not promote that.
Well, promote what?
We'll promote people using it before they lose it.
No, but I guess because it's so different to the annual leave and the personal leave and the way that payroll setups, you know, and accrual. So it's really important that you have an understanding of how you're going to record this in your business, because the next thing is, yes, you do need to record it, but you cannot put on a pay slip family and domestic violence leave for privacy concerns. So I think that it's going to have to sort of be the setup of a more obscure leave code in your payroll systems. That
as soon as they officially label it as something, then everyone knows that it's, you know.
Yeah, Yeah. So it's going to have to, I would suggest, be a bit more of a, not a secret is not the right word, but a code that's going to allow you to track it, but not be easily identifiable to anybody outside.
For safety reasons,
for privacy concerns. So I think that, you know, there are some really big differences with this domestic and family violence leave, and it is going to take employers a little while to get their head around. What we don't have a clear answer on, and you asked me this question before, does it apply to perpetrators? Whilst the legislation says employees can take leave when they're experiencing family or domestic violence, it says experiencing. It doesn't say victim. It doesn't, you know, so again, I wouldn't want to say yes or no until we actually have.
Well, you had a good comeback where you said that if you were the perpetrator and you needed time off to attend counselling or
some
violence
scheduled,
you know,
training or intervention,
that probably it would be reasonable to allow them to access this leave. Look, I actually think it's very rare. I think that, you know, they're very unlikely to disclose to the workplace. I don't know, some situations they might. It is a really taboo subject, and I guess this is forcing it out a little bit as well.
Absolutely. So again, just check your domestic violence leave. Well,
so can I check the 10 days comes out of personal sick leave? Oh no, it's in addition. So it's nothing to do with personal leave. Personal leave stays exactly the same as it is. It is a completely separate standalone domestic and family violence leave. Just like, so you've got your annual leave, your personal leave, your long service leave,
separate bucket,
and then your domestic and violence leave.
Yeah, absolutely. I had another question there from Fiona. If you have a staff member who chooses to work a short day one day due to family commitments and then do an 11-hour day the next day, does it affect overtime? Potentially, yes, it does. You just need to check your award to see what your maximum ordinary hours are, and if they're going over it, you might need an individual flexibility.
I was going to say, that's a really good situation of someone doing a flexibility agreement.
Okay, so wrapping up the priorities for 2023, we think that it's still going to be in wage recovery. So last year, the Fair Work Ombudsman recovered $532 million in wage recovery. That is going to, again, be another 384,000 employees. That's still going to be on the record. The indication is that fast food, restaurants, cafes, and agriculture is still going to be the key industries of focus for next year, and particularly because of the implementation of the new salary arrangements for hospitality and the award changing. That's going to flow on there. And then the monitoring of sham contracting arrangements. I'm going to go down. There's only one more slide to go.
Sorry.
Yep. What does it hold for employers? We think recruitment is probably still going to be one of the biggest challenges going through. And we're really encouraging employers to think outside. You are messing with your phone. Stop touching. Stop touching. No touching for you. Okay. Have a think about your overall recruitment experience. We can't just do things that we've always done. We can't just do the normal Seek ads anymore. We have to do things that are a little bit different, a little bit outside the box.
It's really changed in that it used to be we're the employer, and you know, if you want to come and work for us, you need to be able to have this qualification and this characteristic and this and this. Now we're like, no, we're a really good employer. Please come and work. We're really, it's a different way of thinking. It
really is a dual interview process now.
Yeah.
Employees are interviewing employers more than ever. So it's not just a one-way street. So,
and it's about retaining your staff. Have you got the right work culture? What are you doing to make it the right work culture? What are you doing to make it attractive for people? But people, you know, people do change job because of salary and wages, but generally people, if they really like their workplace, like we don't tend to like change. So if they feel like they're valued and they're enjoying the work culture, they're more likely to stay longer in the workplace. That's why Dean will never leave us.
I say that.
But if you're wanting some ideas as to be a little bit more lateral creative with your recruitment, give Beck a call. She's her particular speciality area, and she really enjoys working with employers on that.
Cool. So I think your key takeaways from today. Check your employment contracts, your employee handbooks and policies for your pay confidentiality clauses.
And if you haven't done already, please make sure that you get those employee handbooks signed off again on an annual basis. So you should be giving them, sending out your handbook when people start an induction, and then it should be distributed on an annual basis thereafter. I recommend you pick a time, you kind of lamppost it to a time that you'll remember. So the start of the year, the middle of the year, whatever it's going to be. It can be by email. It can just be in the office that you've got a couple of copies, but you just want to demonstrate that it's a live document, those policies are there and it's available for them.
Absolutely. So check all your templates. Check your, I'll put you, there's a typo. Check the implementation of paid domestic violence leave, particularly if you are a large employer, because it all starts off tomorrow. If you have an EBA pre-2010, 2009, start planning your next steps about what you're going to do.
And I'd go a step further. I'd say if you were 2011 and 12, start thinking about it, because you'll be the next cab off the rank.
Yeah, and also check that to make sure that your agreement was not approved in that transitional period. Yep. Start planning your strategy around sexual harassment and how you're going to protect yourself and exercise your positive duty of care for your business and for your employees. And if you're using fixed term contracts, review your new obligations and don't just go ahead, I guess, and roll over your fixed term contracts thinking that there's no changes. So that's it, we're done. And look, we even kept within the time frame today. That's really good for us. I think that's a first. That was our New Year's resolution. Yeah, exactly. We're going to keep on time.
Keep on task. So if anyone's got any questions, you should be madly typing now so that we can answer. We tried to answer as we went along today because we're multitasking and a bit clever like that.
But yeah, otherwise, I think that's essentially the wrap up of the changes for 2023 that we're aware of or that are on the board at this point in time. As always, I guess, reach out if you have any questions or if you're in need of any support to navigate through these changes or reviewing your documentation. We're here to help. I guess we're sort of here to help to take the pain away as best we can.
That's just, it's having a plan and working through it.
Yeah.
And that's what we need to be able to do to support you. So awesome. Thank you so much, everyone. And, please don't hesitate to give us a call or shoot us an email if you've got any questions.
Great.
Fantastic.
See you next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.